Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be speaking to Mr. Raveed Laeb, who's the VP of Product at KELA. And we're going to be talking about the current and expected future threat landscape, some different elements related to cyber threat intelligence, fraud detection, vulnerability intelligence, etc. But before we do that, I want to say hi to Raveed. Raveed, how are you today?
Hi, Mark. Very nice to meet you and great being here. I am perfectly fine. How are you?
Pretty good. I'm just getting started. I'm in Arizona right now, and it's what is it? Seven in the morning. What time is it? Where are you at, and what time is it for you?
Oh, wow. So I'm in Tel Aviv, Israel. It is 4 p.m. right now.
Well, pretty much almost on exact opposite sides of the planet then.
Exactly.
How are things in Tel Aviv? Are people nervous about what's going on up to the north of you there with Russia and Ukraine?
I don't think that more so than usual. We don't really feel, I think, the effects like directly here. I will say that we have, like generally speaking, in Israel, a whole lot of people whose families came from former USSR countries in the 90s. So a lot of people are involved, like personally, with families or friends being back in Ukraine or back in Russia, which is not great, I think, for a lot of people. But really on the street, like day-to-day life, the general dialogue, I think that we have enough political issues of our own with an election that we've had lately, that I think people are pretty tied up in that at the moment.
Yeah, it's amazing. We've got a lot of political issues of our own as well, but somehow we still manage to get involved in other things around the world. That's all I'm going to say on the political front, though. Hey, so let's talk a little bit about as you in your role as VP of Product. I would think that there's a certain amount of negotiation that has to take place in terms of you get all these different feature requests, or hey, we need to develop this solution, we need to go in this way, and you and the other leadership team, the rest of the leadership team, needs to kind of figure out really what makes sense for you as a company and for the market, for the also in relation to the competition now and in the future. And so, I would think that one of the things that you look at is the current threat landscape, and then how you feel the threat landscape is going to evolve and what companies need to kind of, keep up. So can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing as the current threat landscape and how do you think it's going to evolve over the next couple of years?
Sure. So that's a great question. I think just as kind of a segue, you've mentioned that in product development, you need to take a lot of things into consideration. And I think that in our space, in cybersecurity, cyber threat intelligence specifically, that is even more so than your usual product development expectations and things that you would look at normally, because you don't have just your users and your competitors and the market and where things are going. You also have actual adversaries and like bad people that you want to monitor, bad people that you want to track, and they are actively working against you, not just your competitors trying to beat you or your users wanting more that you can do. And I think, as you've mentioned, that is why probably the threat landscape is probably the strongest influence that we have on what we do with product, on where we take the roadmap, because I think that a lot of the time what we see happening is that we'll have threat actors doing bad stuff and developing new kinds of markets and new kinds of relationships that we can monitor even before our clients and our users would be aware of that happening. So a lot of the times we're driven not by clients asking us to do something, but by bad actors doing bad stuff to try and target our clients. And then we need to adapt quickly and deliver things even before the organizations we try to help protect know that they even happen. So that's, I think, that's a really good point that you've brought in.
Well,
Generally speaking,
I was just going to add on to what you said. I think that's a really good point that you brought in, because I hadn't thought of it that way, that instead of talking to your customers and asking them what they need or looking at the competition, you're trying to figure out what these bad actors are doing or going to be doing. And that's how you're, kind of taking input and guidance. It's probably not completely, but it's a big part of how you develop your product. So no, I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's an awesome point. Thank you.
Yes, so I think for us, kind of the adversarial aspect of it is super important. And I'll try to give an example that I think answers both the threat landscape stuff and generally, and also touches the point of how do we take that into consideration. So what we've seen lately, like what we observe happening in the threat landscape in general, is basically that you can't really predict what bad actors will do tomorrow, mostly in terms of monetization, right? So the rise of ransomware, for example, that everyone, all of us has been talking about almost indefinitely for the past two years, that's not like a new technique. It's not a new type of attack. It's a new type of monetization. Before you could get domain access on a machine, domain admin access, sorry, on a machine, and you maybe wouldn't have a lot to do with that, or you, like as an attacker, you'd use that to pivot off to something else. What ransomware brought to the table was just a very easy way to monetize that and take that thing that you have and make it into money at the attacker's hand. And no one could have really, or at least most people could not have really predicted that before it actually started happening en masse around, say, late 2018, early 2019, with the affiliate ransomware being introduced and so on. So in terms of threat landscape, I think that I wouldn't try to make any predictions as to what's the new big thing that bad actors are going to try to do. However, what we do see happening, and kind of a thread going between almost everything that we look at, is kind of, I would say, servicization, automation, and commodization of cybercrime goods and services. Now, that was a lot of zations and a lot of very big words, but I think really at the bottom line, what that actually means is that cyber criminals continue the vector that they've been taking for a good few years now, where they make what they do act, behave, and reflect legitimate business. So just like you had Netflix delivering DVDs like physically a good few years ago, and now you have digital catalogs that you can seamlessly browse and buy things from in an automated way, that's exactly what cyber criminals have been doing. We see that with specialized stores that sell access to credentials obtained from infected machines. We see that happening with markets selling access to compromised servers, like RDP servers, that could be used either as a beachhead in the network or as kind of a jump server to do some other bad stuff from. And whereas a few years ago you only had a few actors doing that, that becomes more and more and more of a trend. And that's because that helps cyber criminals monetize what they've done the easiest way possible. Now, if I dive specifically into an example from the recent year, we have added coverage in our platforms some time ago to a specific type of stores in the cybercrime financial ecosystem. By the way, the cybercrime financial ecosystem is what a lot of vendors would refer to as the dark web, which we kind of try to avoid. So we've started covering a good few stores in the underground ecosystem where where threat actors are monetizing access to business email accounts. So say you're a bad actor, you've got access to someone's email, maybe because you've stolen the credentials via phishing, or maybe because you've brute forced them, or maybe because you've infected the machine with an info stealer, and now you have the credentials. Be it as it may, you now have access to, say, a CFO in a small, medium enterprise. You have access to their email box. And now that begs the question, as a bad actor, what are you now going to do with that? How do you create to yourself a return on investment and turn it into actual money that you can then use? Sorry. Apologies. Should I take it a step back?
No, I think you're good. Go ahead.
Okay. So that begs the question of how do you actually make a profit from it? Now, traditionally, you would see actors doing things like business email compromise or use the email access to steal intellectual property and stuff along these lines. However, what we see more and more actors doing now is saying, I don't care what someone will do with that. What I'm going to do is start an online store where I just offer these accesses to corporate emails for sale, and then people can come and buy them. and I don't have to come with a business model for myself and start being really good at business email compromise or being really good at spear phishing. Instead, I'll just create a platform like an e-commerce platform where I can sell that to other actors who might be interested in that. And that kind of really that is a keynote that we've been seeing for a very long time now, really culminating around the last 2 years, where you see more and more actors instead, or at least on top of becoming a part of a group, starting their own like small business or contributing to an existing business where they just sell the things that they have. That can be email access, as I mentioned, that can be credentials obtained from infected machines, that could be servers, that could be network accesses that are offered for sale for people who are interested in buying them. And that really informs in our notion of how we monitor cyber threat intelligence and cybercrime specifically, is that informs the notion of what organizations should do to gain better visibility of where they're exposed. And really, if I were to sum it up, is I don't necessarily know what bad actors will do tomorrow and how will that affect actual organizations. What I do see, or what we do see as a company, is more and more commodization of things that would not be a commodity or wouldn't have been a commodity 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. And basically what it gives threat actors is access to a wider catalog of digital goods they can buy. Now, again, instead of starting to attack an organization and get email access as an attacker like A to Z from yourself, you can just go and buy that access from someone and then specialize in your own kind of specific business model. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. And so what I'm hearing is this cybercrime ecosystem. It's kind of like cybercrime as a service. And you have people who specialize. I mean, it's just one more iteration of the gig economy, right? Where you've got these people that they specialize in one point or one specific activity, and they're really good at that. And then instead of like going and taking it all the way through to the end, they just capture those credentials or whatever it is, and then put them for sale. So let me ask you this though. To me, because I live in the bricks and mortar world, and that's the way my mind works. I think like if there's a shop over there selling, what do they call it, pirated DVDs or something illegal, the police can just go shut it down, because in order for customers to find that shop, they've got to do some kind of advertising or word of mouth or something. Now, when we go to this, and I'm not sure if I got it correct, you called it the cybercrime ecosystem?
Correct.
Okay. When you go into that, AKA the dark web, how are potential customers connecting with these people, and why can't law enforcement interject themselves in there?
So that is a very good question. And really, it has a very simple answer. They just advertise. So that the areas of the internet in which cyber criminals operate, some of them at least, really look like what the internet looked like, say, 10 years ago. You have like big, like splashy banners on top of a website. Like you'd go into a Russian-speaking forum, for example, and the forum at the top would have a sponsored ad by a credit card market that says, like in bright, bold letters, best credit card market out there, go and buy some stolen cards, and it like flashes in a lot of different colors. So really, advertising of these kinds of services is an open secret. Like if you know where to go, and assuming that you know like which forums exist out there, which Telegram channels to follow, and which dedicated websites would be relevant within the ecosystem, you would see a lot of publications, you would see a lot of sponsored ads working within that specific ecosystem. So knowing which services are out there is really not hard once you've ingrained yourself a tiny bit within that community. And that's for a very good reason, because again, trying to make as big a profit as possible, being again kind of mirrors of legitimate business, cyber criminals know that they really have to advertise. Like that's the only way you bring in clients. And I think that also creates kind of a tension, right? Because on one hand, you're a bad person on the internet doing bad illegal stuff to hurt other people in the world. So that kind of again, informs the notion of secrecy. But on the other hand, you want to attract clients. And if you have a service that does something, but no one knows about it, so how would you make money? And I think that clashes a lot of the time. And what that really created is a situation in which once you're inside a community, you see people talking about mostly everything. So you would see, again, advertisements for credit card shops and for account shops and people selling network access to compromised organizations, and people openly recruiting, or at least used to openly recruit for ransomware as a service crews. That's really kind of all happens out there. And really for law enforcement, knowing that these places exist, I don't think that's a technical challenge, right? Because again, once you're in a community, it's pretty easy to see what's happening. I think that there are different challenges. So for example, one challenge that we are highly minded of or very mindful of when we do our day-to-day work here in KELA, and I assume in other cyber threat intelligence companies as well, is the use of very specific nomenclature by cyber criminals. So that's like super out there in Russian-speaking communities, where you would see people using terminology and language that you would not understand if you were to copy and paste it into Google Translate. Like cyber criminals have developed very specific nomenclature, weird ways to talk about stuff, where if you don't know that culture, like the specific cyber criminal culture, it would be very hard or could be hard to understand what's happening even. And I think that is where traditional like intelligence people, like the kind of personas that make up a lot of cyber threat intelligence companies and law enforcement services as well, that's where we kind of have an advantage, because a lot of us have done very similar things in prior careers. Me, for example, I come from the Israeli military intelligence, and that is not very different from a lot of stuff I've done before. I'm not fluent in Russian, I will say, but the notion of adversaries trying to use different specific nomenclature, either because they want to and that's how they speak, or because they kind of try to confuse and obfuscate what they're trying to do, that's not a new notion. So the way we deal with that specifically here, and I do know that in a lot of other companies as well, is we have fluent Russian-speaking analysts and researchers on our teams who can help us navigate kind of the intricacies on what's going on in these communities. So just to reiterate, I think that it's not a technical challenge of knowing what's out there, but we have two different challenges. Again, first one is that understanding the nomenclature, understanding what's happening, but also coverage. Knowing that now someone offers access to a service that sells compromised credentials is not necessarily enough to do something with that, because taking down websites on the internet in 2022 is not always easy, but also not always effective. So let's say that, again, you track a domain that a bad actor uses and you get the domain blacklisted from the ISP. So, okay, so they'll just go and start a new domain and a new domain and a new domain and a new domain after it. So a lot of times playing kind of the cat and mouse game is not super helpful for law enforcement. And in terms of coverage, what you would like to do a lot of times at least is to either kind of have that service still available so you can see what's going inside it and at least inform organizations that they've been impacted. Or what one thing you can do as well is just try and look into the actors behind it. So not the website, but the actors that run it, their TTPs, how do they do things? And as we all know, I think from a lot of CTI publications, kind of the holy grail, which is attribution, like identifying the real person behind a service. Now, granted, that's not always effective as well. You have people who reside in countries that do not necessarily have any sort of an agreement with other countries in the world, where even if you know for a fact or you have a lot of evidence that a certain individual is specifically connected to a cybercrime operation, so what? That wouldn't necessarily help you detain them or like physically, kinetically affect their existence in the world in one way or another, which I think for law enforcement is a bit confusing at times.
You know, if there are any aspiring cyber criminals out there listening to this, you're not doing much to discourage them. But
So
hey, go ahead.
no, I think for good or worse, that's the fact of the world. Attribution is hard. Um, Disrupting cybercrime is hard, at least from a physical point of view. I do think that we have seen a string of so attribution is hard, affecting cyber criminals in the physical realm, in which we live is hard. It doesn't mean, however, that there are no effects that could be done. We have seen a lot of cyber criminal operations dismantled, even if their owners and the people, like the physical flesh and blood people behind them, are still out there. One example that comes to mind that I think was super interesting is the Glaptaba. I don't know if I'm even pronouncing it right, but the Glaptaba or Gluptaba botnet dismantled, at least in part, or very, very significantly disrupted by Google, and like in a big coordinated action around a year ago. So I wouldn't say that there's a reason to be happy about being a cyber criminal. Even if you won't be detained, your business hopefully will be disrupted and you won't have a good time. And hopefully, as we do see happening, at least in bits and bytes, not everything is published, of course, we do see some successes in people are like being detained, being arrested, being physically affected, and paying the price for being a bad person on the internet.
Well, let's step away from the law enforcement side for a second and look over at, how you help your customers. So I'm assuming that, you have a couple different ways. You could identify vulnerabilities in advance, or if you're out there in the cybercrime ecosystem, and if you see that, hey, these credentials have been compromised and they're for sale in this ecosystem, you can alert your customer. Is that how it works?
Very much correct. Like in a nutshell, that's exactly it. The way we look at what we do is kind of to extend the notion of what is commonly referred to in the industry as attack surface management, or attack surface discovery, or like the notion of attack surface, really. So mostly in the industry, in cybersecurity, in cyber threat intelligence, you see people or you hear people talking about attack surface management as kind of a technical thing, right? So you say, oh, you should scan your network or go to solutions that show you what your network looks like, because that's what cyber criminals do as well. So you go to a network crawler and look at open ports because cyber criminals do that. So and that is super important, right? Like knowing what you look like technically, expose banners that you might have, expose vulnerabilities, open ports, stuff from the kind of classic attack surface domain. That's super important and super relevant. What in concept, what we're trying to bring to the table is kind of an extension to that. So attack surface is not just the technical assets that you're exposing to the internet. Attack surface is anything that attackers can see about your organization. So that includes the credentials, that includes your employees that have been infected with info stealers and have leaked unknowingly credentials and sensitive information to the internet. That also includes, again, as mentioned before, your access to your email accounts, which is being monetized, access to servers that have anything to do with you or your supply chain. And really what we're going for is giving a more holistic view of what an organization looks like, not just from the technical perspective of what your network is structured like and what can bad guys see about your DNS, but also what they can see about different assets that you might have. Again, employees, credentials, databases, things that are more soft and not as technical, but are super useful to threat actors at the end of the day. So expand that notion and really understand what do people what do threat actors what do threat actors see when they look at you, not just in form of a network graph. So that's kind of the bottom line for everything that we're trying to do, and that also includes some, I would say, creative interpretations to what that means. So, for example, again, seeing threat actors offering access to an unidentified or an unnamed network of a company within the sector of a specific organization, informing organizations on what's happening is contributing to them knowing their attack surface better, or knowing at least kind of. So sorry, I've got lost there. Let me take it like a minute back. I've just had a phone call which distracted me for a second. Sorry.
No worries.
So basically what we're trying to do is to expand the notion of attack surface a bit and not just have organizations look at their technical indicators of what their network looks like from the internet, but really what they look like as an organization. So that includes things that bad actors know about you that are shared in forums, credentials that belong to you that are shared in markets, your supply chain and how it's viewed. Maybe one of your suppliers was infected and extorted with a ransomware, which might affect what threat actors now know about you because your files have leaked through that attack. So we're trying to look holistically at what bad actors look at when they try to find attack opportunities, and kind of integrate that into what we do. So that really goes on the whole spectrum of attack surface, from also doing these technical things and giving you an understanding of what your DNS and your servers and like your network looks like on the internet, but also augmenting and enriching that with curated intelligence, like more proprietary software intelligence that we glean from our sources, like everything I've talked about so far, credentials and emails and servers that have been compromised and so on.
So how do you do that? I'm assuming you have some kind of automated, I mean, you can't just out there, poking around on an individual basis. So how does the tool work?
So very much correct. I think at the heart of our technology and really the heart of what we do and do well, I would say, although I'm biased as a company, is we develop collection methods. So before we have fancy user interfaces and APIs that allow our users to do stuff, really the core technology is collectors, fully automated collectors that we've been building for about 8 years now, since we've started doing cyber threat intelligence. And these collectors are good at one thing, which is going into a website like a user, like a human being would, extract stuff from that website and bring them back to us. So basically that could be targeted at forums, and then we extract all the posts that could be targeted at data leak sites and blogs maintained by ransomware operators, and then we can bring back leaked files and names of victims and so on. That can be targeted at, for example, like I've said before, markets that sell credentials obtained from info stealers, and then we bring that back. So really the basis of everything is automated collection from a wide variety of cybercrime sources. On top of that, we have structuring and processing of the data to extract observables from it and to extract and mine entities from it. And from there, we have detection. So basically, our users go into our platforms and they can create the rule set on which they want to be alerted. So say, I'm an organization, I want to be alerted on credentials for this domain, so domain A and domain B that I own, mentioned in credential markets. I want to be alerted on that particular string that I use as a honey token in all of my in my code against ransomware blogs, so I know if my code has been leaked and so on. So these are, I think, like kind of the three main tiers to our services. Collection, which is automated and scalable and really the basis of everything that we do. Structuring and processing, which takes all of the raw data that we've collected and chops and dices it into something that is much more easily digested by users. And the detection part of it, which helps users and our clients essentially find the intelligence that they would like to use to defend themselves in a more efficient way.
Okay, so once you get the intelligence, I mean, let's just say that, hey, we found out these credentials are compromised, or somebody's trying to sell some information about my organization in this cyber crime ecosystem. At that point, you need like a human in the loop, right? Somebody that's going to say, okay, I've got the intelligence. How relevant is this, and what do we do to follow up? Do you provide that as a service as well, or do you coach your customers on best practices, or do you just give them the report and then they've got to figure things out?
So, very good question, and the real business challenge that I think we've had throughout the years. So we've started, I think, as a lot of small, like bootstrapped agile companies do. We've started by doing things manually, and we've started by creating alerts and then have a human vet the alerts, understand what would be the remediation, and talk to a client about what they should do, and kind of provide managed services. Over time, we've started taking the knowledge that we now have because we've done that manually and move it upstream, move it to ways that we could infer severity and credibility in a fully automated way within the detection phase that I mentioned before, and basically take a lot of the repetitive tasks that humans would do, like analysts on our end, and make the platform do them at least to an extent. And then focus less on managed services for alerts, but on providing, if needed, professional services for triage and for enrichment and for incident response and for giving our clients more context on the threats and alerts that matter. So we don't have a lot of human hands on keyboards dealing with the intelligence. Right now, mostly everything flows fully automated. We do have, as part of the business model, a way for our clients to engage our professional services team, but for a lot of clients, it's not necessarily needed. So like we can have an automated pipeline that says like, yeah, once a day alert me whenever my credentials were exposed in third-party breaches and include plain text passwords. You can create kind of this rule that works, that makes sense for you as an organization, because then you know at the end of the pipeline that what you need to do is take these usernames and, for example, going to the most obvious part of that, have their password be resetted. So a lot of that could be done automatically. I wouldn't say that still we're in like full automation. I think that a lot of vendors talk about machine learning and classification, a lot of like very fancy stuff on top of the data. I would say that sometimes you would need subject matter experts or analysts or someone to help you operationalize the intelligence. However, most of the time it would be covered by the automation that we have right now. And I think most importantly, by integrations, which is something that a lot of our clients use. So you wouldn't just bring the data back to the platform, but you could take that if you integrate one of our products with a SOAR maybe that you're using internally. So you could integrate everything and have the SOAR do the work for you, which I think is a solution that a lot of our clients and a lot of organizations in the market are headed for anyway at the moment. So a lot of organizations are headed towards kind of a centralized pipeline within the organization that manages everything, and then we could just plug into that instead of just bringing more and more and more human hands on keyboards to the table.
That's interesting, and I want to come back to your the profile of your clients and what's the sweet spot for your offering in a second. But first off, when I went through your website, I noticed that you obviously your platform provides a lot of different services: cyber threat intelligence, fraud detection, law enforcement support. One of the things you mentioned is vulnerability intelligence, and this is something that I'm actually quite interested in these days. And when you're okay, just let me make sure that we're defining vulnerability intelligence in the same manner. When I think of vulnerability intelligence, it's like, Mac OS has a new known vulnerability and there's no patch, or there is a patch, here's the patch, that kind of thing, right? Is that the same when you talk about vulnerability intelligence? Are we talking about the same thing?
So yes and no. I
Okay.
think that when we talk about vulnerability intelligence, we mostly talk about contextualization, and that goes a lot back to informing the attack surface module that we've talked about before. So for example, when we provide an attack surface alert on an exposed server that leaks a service, like a service banner, what we want to do is to enrich that and make sure that you only need to take care of that and you only be alerted if, in terms of vulnerability intelligence, we see something that's actionable. there, and we won't just alert you on any exposed server, but on servers that have relevant or contextualized vulnerabilities residing in the information that we're seeing. So that's one way we look at vulnerability intelligence. Another way is that within our products, we can provide dedicated feeds or queries that give our users kind of an understanding on how a specific vulnerability is now being discussed or mentioned or leveraged by attackers as seen via our collections. So I think that when we talk about vulnerability intelligence, you have a lot of different roads, like a lot of a lot of different ways that you can take. One of them, which is something that a lot of vendors do, at least some vendors do in our market, and that I would say that could bring value, is kind of a platform that scores the latest vulnerabilities for you and shows you like more scoring on top of CVSS or NVD, which a lot of people would argue are not enough. We don't take that necessarily in that direction. Rather than vulnerability intelligence is ingrained to some of our flows in the platform. For example, attack surface management is built on vulnerability intelligence, as well as you can use our products, and we push like intelligence into our products that talks about trending in vulnerabilities, that talks about campaigns using specific interesting vulnerabilities to help our clients be more informed about what's happening out there. And a lot of times that comes down to a very specific point where you see like a new vulnerability being released, and 2 days after, you see in specific cybercrime communities actors already sharing POCs. So that really closes the circle and tells you, oh, that's not just another CVE out of 100 that came out this week. That's the one that I should actually pay attention to, because threat actors have paid attention to that as well. So I think that also kind of ties back to what we've talked about with a more holistic attack surface view, is also knowing what adversaries know, not just about you, but about vulnerabilities and about tools that might be leveraged against you. So that's kind of where we focus within the vulnerability intelligence space.
Excellent. That helps clarify a lot for me. Let me ask you, tell me a little bit about KELA in terms of your global footprint and how you go to market and what are your kind of target profile customers.
Sure. So I think KELA is a bit unique in the market. We're not the sole one, but we're one of a very, very few companies who are bootstrapped. So we're not a classic startup. We're not funded by VCs. We don't have an external stakeholder doing like telling us what to do, which is sometimes nice, but sometimes hard, because when you're a bootstrapped company, you grow organically. Which is also again can be good but can be a challenge. So right now we're a bit over, I would say right now 80 people, so 80. Most of us are headquartered in Israel. We do have however, quite a significant headcount relatively in the States, in some parts of Europe, and in APAC, in a few specific countries. And that's also where most of our clientele or the client profile is based. Basically, because we're bootstrapped and because we've been doing what we're doing for about 7 or 8 years now, it took us some time to find our place in the market. If you were to Google us and search us 3-4 years ago, you would probably find nothing at all about us. So it took us really some time to find our pace, understand how the market works, because again, we don't have a fancy VC helping us, or we don't really have funds that we can spill on sponsored publications, because the money that we have goes into hiring the best talent so we can deliver the best product. So that's kind of a bit about where we come from and how we came to being a vendor right now on that podcast, even though probably a lot of your listeners have not heard about us. Generally speaking, again, most of us are headquartered in Israel, especially the research and development. And in terms of customer persona, I would say that really everyone, every organization, governmental, law enforcement, NGOs, corporates, everyone needs to some extent at least cyber threat intelligence, because in today's day and age, everyone's a target. We've talked about ransomware before, and ransomware being such a good, quote unquote, way to monetize attacks just because it works on everyone. There isn't a single organization who would love to be encrypted and would love to have their data exfiltrated or sold. So that's why it's such a good business model, and that is also again why everyone needs cyber threat intelligence. However, the space being as it is, up until say maybe a year or two ago, you would see a lot of maturity and a lot of cooperation with cyber threat intelligence, mostly for big organizations, mostly for financial institutions and law enforcement. And I think for a good few years that was a very big part of our client base. But lately, in the past 2 years, we've been focusing and succeeding on working more mid-market, so SMBs and SMEs, as in small, medium businesses, small, medium enterprises, with more lenient and easy access to our platforms, more focused on product-led growth, so doing free trials, like unmanaged free trials for some of our platforms, and trying to reach to users who might not be the classic CTI profile, so like an ex-military person that knows the most sophisticated tools. We want to expand that notion a bit and provide easier intelligence and easier protection to smaller organizations as well. I think that still probably the leading markets are the States, Western Europe, few specific countries within, and APAC. We have a big presence in Japan. That is probably kind of the center of our APAC operations, but also some other companies in some other countries in the area as well, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And your engagement model, is it basically your target customers are searching for some type of cyber threat intelligence, and they're looking for platforms, and then they would reach out to you, ask for a trial, a demo, or something like that?
Yes, so that is fairly common. We've really made a change internally, at least. We're still working on making that actually work in scale, but we've been very much led by sales, say up until 2 years ago, where we'd had engagement where salespeople would go and reach out to clients just because we weren't a very well-known company. So we'd go and hunt for clients and try to convince them to use our product, which I think everyone who has done B2B or B2E knows that that's hard, that's grinding work, very long sales cycles, takes time, very tolling, not fun. We've had successes, again, being bootstrapped and still being in existence for a long time means that we do have business coming in, but it wasn't hard, it wasn't really streamlined. So while getting better at sales, like a lot of small companies do, we also started investing more in product-led growth, and we've created a funnel where if you read one of our publications or an article in which we've been mentioned, or heard a podcast in which I was rambling for an hour about cybercrime, we can then go and visit our website and register for a free trial on DarkBeast, one of our platforms, and we don't have necessarily to chase you because we just bring you into the product, and hopefully you see for yourself that it works, that it could bring value to the organization, how it can be used, and then engagement goes from there. So we've been investing a lot in that, and it kind of more organic funnels that bring clients or prospects in. We still, of course, do enterprise sales, but we try to make it work together. The way we view it, if we have better funnels that bring people to us, we can then focus sales on solving hard challenges with specific prospects and not go and chase every organization in the world, because really we would probably be outchased by a lot of our competitors who are classic startups, who have VC funding and who can invest in having like 10 times the amount of salespeople that we do. And probably if you're a CISO of an SME or a big enterprise listening to us right now, probably your email box and your phone are already exploding with a bunch of cyber threat intelligence vendors trying to sell you every tool in existence. So we can empathize with the pain. So we try to kind of pivot away from that and more into product-led growth, bringing people into the product, thought leadership, talking about stuff that we find interesting. Hopefully that works. So that's kind of where we're at the moment.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And having spent most of my career on the sales, business development, leadership side, I got to say, it's always better to get a warm inbound lead than to sit somebody on it used to be a phone, but now it's typically LinkedIn messages or something like that, and just blasting out to everybody. It's really, really challenging that way because, as you said, everybody's getting blasted, tons of emails every day, tons of calls. But when it comes the other way, when they're looking, and then and especially if they engage with the free trial, and then you can have one of your people follow up, then makes a lot of sense, especially if they need something custom, or they need some tweaks, which is actually a good thing. Just a couple more questions.
Sure.
Walk me through, as much as you can, your pricing model, and then um, and then if I was a CISO, why would I choose KELA versus, as you mentioned, there are tons of other companies out there, many of them VC backed, many of them already further down the maturity road. Why would I choose KELA?
Sure. So I'll speak a bit vaguely about the pricing
That's
model.
fine. That's fine.
Product people don't really like to go into pricing a lot of times.
Okay.
So generally speaking, we try to combine seat-based pricing with usage-based pricing. So for example, if you go into Darkbeast, the investigation engine that we offer, what you would get is a specific amount of searches or queries you can do a day. That is the easiest pricing that we can have. And if we talk about monitoring services or monitoring products that we offer, like Intellect or Radar, most of the time we would provide kind of a custom package for a specific or a set amount of assets that an organization has in terms of attack surface and cybercrime intelligence monitoring. And that would be that package, and then you can multiply it or add different seats. So the amount of users, the amounts of teams and silos that you want to bring in, that would kind of inform the pricing for the monitoring platforms. So for some we have usage based, for some we have seat based, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense.
And in terms of why should the CISO choose KELA, I would say really I can talk a lot about how our intelligence is great and how our platforms are intuitive, but really every vendor would say that, and a lot of them would be right. So I think really we're in a market where some of our competitors are great, like really good companies, great intelligence, super talented people all around. Really, I don't think personally that that's been the situation forever. I think that we have seen all of the market mature the last few years, and that's really fun to see. I think that us as a company, and me specifically as a person, I don't have anything. I don't have a grudge against competitors. Like if someone tries to outperform me, if they succeed, amazing. They're probably super talented, and then I can learn from them. Um, so I can talk about our intelligence being great. I do think that's true, but I don't necessarily think that that would convince anyone because everyone says that, and a lot of people have something to show for that. I would say, really, for us, the fact that we're bootstrapped, the fact that we have a growing client base and we're a growing company, I think that speaks to itself. When you don't rely on someone else's money, um, and you can grow, that tells you something about people actually buying the product, about the intelligence actually helping our users, and about us bringing value and bringing something to the table that other people, other organizations in the world are willing to pay for, which I would say is super important because it goes beyond the ability to buy AdWords. So we pop up first, and beyond our ability to know the right people to talk to in the media, which, don't get me wrong, is super important. But if you have a good PR firm and you have like a good, nice chunk of VC money, that is more accessible. When you're a bootstrapped company, and again, we're not the only one in the market. I would just like to say that, and a shout out to other bootstrapped companies who have worked very hard on getting places. When you're bootstrapped, you don't necessarily have that luxury, and what you do has to speak for itself. And I think that we're in a situation where we are in that place. However, more than everything, because we have a free trial, I would say to CISO, come play around with the product for 2 weeks, and you'll probably see for yourself why you should choose us.
Awesome. Hey, Raveed, thank you so much. I could sit here and ask a lot more questions, but we're running up on our 1 hour hard stop here. That's a lot of great information, and it sounds like KELA is really, I mean, it's amazing that you guys have bootstrapped this. You have a presence obviously in Israel, North America, Asia. You're growing, and I do like that product-driven growth strategy. Being on the West Coast of the U.S., I've seen too many times the marketing, even PR lead, the vaporware lead, and the product fall behind. And if the product is good and you're in the right market, it's going to do well. And I'm sure you guys are going to do awesome. Last question. If people want to find more information about KELA or connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
So we are available at ke-la.com. So that's ke-la.com. Not the best domain. We want to get something better done. But
you need
that?
You definitely need a VC partner for those domain things, man.
That's true. So we're available at ke-la.com. I am available on Twitter at Raveed L. So Raveedl. That's me. I'm also available on LinkedIn with the same name, so Raveed Laeb, as well as the KELA LinkedIn profile. Oh, and of course we have the KELA Twitter as well, Intel by KELA, so Intel_by_KELA. Come listen to what we have to say. Hopefully it will be interesting.
Thank you so much, Raveed. You have a great rest of 2022, okay?
Thank you very much, Mark. Pleasure.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.